The Subcommittee on Consumer Protection and Commerce will now come to order. Today, we will be holding a hearing entitled Changing Time. What is that? Revisiting Spring Forward, Fall Backward. Due to COVID-19 public health emergency, members can participate today in today's hearing either in person or remotely via online video conferencing in accordance with the updated guidelines issued by the attending physician. Members, staff, and members of the press that are in the room are not required to wear masks. For members participating remotely, your microphones will be set on mute for the purpose of eliminating inadvertent background noise. Members participating remotely will need to unmute yourself, your microphones, each time that you wish to speak. Please note that once you are unmuted, once you unmute your microphone, anything that you say in WebEx will be heard over loudspeaker in the committee room and subject to being heard by the live streaming and C-SPAN. Since members are participating from different locations at today's hearing, recording, we will recognize members for questions according to subcommittee seniority. Documents for the record shall be sent to Ed Kazmierski at the email address that has been provided to staff, and all documents will be entered into the record at the conclusion of the hearing. The chairman now recognizes herself for 5 minutes. Let me just note that we are expecting votes this morning. It looks like between 9:45 and 10 o'clock. Let's try and get through opening statements and maybe even our witnesses' testimony. So I'll begin with myself for 5 minutes. When I was a new member of Congress, there was a vote to change how we observe daylight savings time. And I was pretty surprised that we have the power to change time itself. So today, we exercise that power as we discuss daylight saving. Some people say daylight savings, it's daylight saving time. The period from spring to fall when we all set our clocks ahead 1 hour. Standardizing time across the country has its roots in the growth of railroads across America in the late 19th century, when it became imperative to regulate timekeeping to avoid confusion with trade and travel. In 1918, Congress established 5 time zones to provide a standard time and created daylight saving time for daylight. Following its adoption by Europe during World War II. After World War II, however, daylight savings time was actually abolished at the federal level, though localities had the option of continuing to observe, and so this resulted in confusion. So the Interstate Commerce Commission recommended that Congress re-examine the issue. The Uniform Time Act of 1966 set up the basic system that we are using as of today, when we spring forward and fall back to observe daylight saving time, as we will this upcoming Sunday. Don't forget. History shows that daylight saving time has benefits and costs. The growing public interest in this topic and action on the state level brings us here today. Some argue that when we spring forward and lose an hour of sunshine in the morning, that this impacts our health, school children commuting to school, and potentially even traffic safety. On the other hand, there are those who contend that the extra hour of sunshine in the evening can be beneficial, a real boon to restaurants and commercial commerce and tourism. Supporters of daylight saving time claim that it is an energy saving and energy saver, and point to a 2008 report by the Department of Energy, which found that daylight saving time saves 1.2 terawatts of energy per year, though other studies have rather mixed results. Studies have found that the transition itself from standard time to daylight savings and back again has health impacts. These recent studies found that the transition causes cumulative sleep loss and may result in more heart attacks and mood disorders. So today we hear from experts who can illuminate these issues. I look forward to our discussion as we learn more about the benefits and costs of daylight saving time. And I want to thank you. I want to give my thanks to the witnesses for joining us today. And the chair now yields to my distinguished ranking member of this subcommittee, Mr. Bilirakis. I just promoted him to
Thanks
Dr. Bilirakis, member of the subcommittee. I yield to you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Good morning, Madam Chair. Good morning to everyone. Thank you, Madam Chair, for holding this hearing and examining the issue of daylight saving time and our spring forward coming on Sunday, this upcoming weekend. And thank you to our witnesses for testifying and providing your expertise on this matter. I look forward to the hearing and again, getting your perspectives on this particular issue. My constituents I did a survey recently and they feel strongly about this issue. So I'm glad we're having the hearing. Of course, we have other issues we have to deal with as well. Since 1918, when daylight saving time was first enacted, it has received many praises and criticisms, as well as many attempted revisions from this body of Congress. I know that almost 40 years ago, this committee held a hearing on legislation to extend daylight saving time, a hearing which my father, Congressman Mike Bilirakis, participated in when he served on the subcommittee on energy conservation. So back then, the legislation would have extended this practice with the aim to decrease energy consumption during the spring and summer, a continuation of its original purpose to reduce usage of oil during the First World War. While I have heard the original desired outcome of this practice, may have diminished over the course of the last 100 years, a topic I hope to discuss today, I know that Americans' opinions of daylight saving time have not. This is a topic that I continue to hear about back home from my constituents, so hopefully this hearing serves to educate the members here today so we can make informed decisions moving forward. And while there are certainly many topics that deserve our attention in this subcommittee, today's topic comes just a few days before we once again go through the ritual many of us don't understand or care for. This Sunday, as the chairman said, we will likely experience an almost seamless change as our phones now have the ability to reset the time on their own. I say almost seamlessly, because while this transition may be easy for our devices, it is not so much for our bodies. Humans are not as simple as winding a watch back or forward or resetting the time on our microwave. The toll the time change has on your bodies, on our bodies and our mind can be severe, even when it may not be apparent and can cause health effects, as the chairwoman said, like increased depression and greater risk of heart attack and strokes. I'm glad to have the perspective of Dr. Mallow on this panel so we can further examine the impacts changing the clocks have on our bodies and our mental state, our mental health, especially during this pandemic. We also need to examine the effects daylight saving time has on the economy. In my home state of Florida, the Sunshine State, we take our daylight very seriously. In fact, Florida's legislature passed a state bill that would make daylight saving time permanent year-round. But the policy requires congressional approval to take effect. That's another reason why I'm glad that we're holding this bipartisan hearing to learn more about the impacts of daylight saving time and how Congress can consider time changes nationwide. We have to be very careful, deliberative on this issue. A lot of our industries, like travel and tourism, rely on daylight, of course, daylight, and of course in my state of Florida, later to provide Floridians and tourists with good services all around the country. Simply put, the longer the sun is out in the afternoon and evening, the more consumers will be outside participating in local economies. That's why I'm pleased we will hear from Lyle Beckwith, the Senior Vice President at the National Association of Convenience Stores, so we can learn more about how the change in time impacts businesses in our great economy. So again, thank you, Madam Chair, for holding this hearing, and I look forward to engaging on this particular discussion and this particular subject. I yield back the balance of my time. Appreciate it.
The gentleman yields back, and now I recognize Mr. Pallone, the chairman of the full committee, for 5 minutes for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairwoman Schakowsky. This weekend, we will once again spring forward, changing our clocks forward 1 hour. It's a weekend that makes a lot of us unhappy. The loss of that 1 hour of sleep seems to impact us for days afterwards. It also can cause havoc on the sleeping patterns of our kids and our pets. This is all an inconvenience, but unfortunately, the changing of our clocks has impacts on our health and our economy, which begs the question, do we still need to spring forward or fall back in the first place? And it's a question that many of us ask every time we have to do it. And it's getting harder and harder to justify, considering that in a 2019 poll, 71% of Americans said they preferred to no longer switch their clocks twice a year. Today, we'll examine the impacts of this time change and whether it still makes sense or is obsolete. Historians have long debated who first came up with the idea of daylight savings time, but it was first adopted nationwide in Germany during World War I in an effort to save energy. During World War II, the United States adopted year-round daylight savings time, known as the wartime, in an effort to save energy and increase productivity. And over the years, numerous justifications were made for changing our clocks twice a year, most commonly and notably energy conservation. It was believed that extending light into the evening hours would help consumers pay less for electricity because they would not have to turn on the lights until later in the night. However, modern luxuries such as heating, air conditioning, and other appliances have changed that calculation. Furthermore, advancements in LED lighting and other energy-efficient appliances are not only saving consumers money, but they are virtually making the energy conservation justification moot and outdated. And it becomes harder to justify when you consider the health and economic impacts associated with changing our clocks. Studies have shown an increase in the rate of heart attacks and strokes in the 2 days immediately following the time change. Disturbingly, these stroke rates are even higher for some of our most vulnerable populations. Cancer patients' stroke rates increased by 25%, and people over the age of 65 are 20% more likely to have a stroke in the days following the time change. Our children also suffer. Study after study shows the importance of a consistent full night's sleep for our kids. The time change impacts our economy. Employers report an almost 6% increase in workplace injuries in the days following the time change, and those injuries resulted in 67% more workdays lost. So studies have also shown that people simply are not as productive at work in the days following the time change, spending more time on their computer or on non-work related activities, and all of these side effects hurt our economy. So I've highlighted a couple of studies, but the committee would like to know more. That's why Ranking Member Rogers and I intend to request an evaluation and analysis from the Department of Transportation about the effects of daylight savings time. This review, as well as this hearing, will help our committee as we examine this important issue. I have yet to decide whether I support, Madam Chair, a permanent switch to standard or daylight time, but I do think it's time to stop changing the clocks. I believe that any justifications for springing forward and falling back are either outdated or are outweighed by the serious health and economic impacts we now know are associated with the time changes. So thank the witnesses, and I look forward to hearing their perspectives on the issue. And I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back, and now the chair recognizes Ms. Rogers, our ranking member of the full committee, for 5 minutes.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning to our witnesses, especially Steve Calandrillo from the University of Washington, my alma mater. I know Steve's done a lot of work on daylight savings. I look forward to hearing his insights. I'd also like to give a special shout out to State Senators Joe Schmick and Jim Honeyford from back home. They've both been leaders on this issue in Washington State. On Sunday, most of the country will once again go through the ritual of moving our clocks ahead 1 hour. Statistics show that daylight savings coincides with worse student test scores and spikes in the number of car accidents and heart attacks. As the chairman mentioned, together we're going to refresh the record on this topic with a renewed inquiry with the Secretary of Transportation as to his department and the enforcement mechanism for the Uniform Time Act. That said, there remains many issues that this committee should be prioritizing before daylight savings, like unleashing American energy to help Ukraine and counter Russian aggression. My thoughts and prayers continue to be with the people of Ukraine who are fighting for their freedom, their lives. We could do more, and we must do more. This committee needs to lead to ensure economic and national security. I'm pleased we have witnesses here today representing the convenience stores. I know my friends back home, Tammy Hedrick and Dan Alsacker, work closely with Mr. Beckwith. And with that, I'm going to yield to the Republican leader on the Energy Subcommittee, Fred Upton, for his comments.
Well, I thank my leader, and I just want to say, as I look at the picture, a portrait of John Dingell, he said this committee was really, our jurisdiction was really 2 words. You can do it in charades. First word is little, the. Second word, world, the world. That's what we have jurisdiction over, including time. Mm-hmm. So back in 2005, it was this committee that actually changed the times, the periods when daylight savings would be in effect. And we did a lot of research. I was the Republican lead back there. Ed Markey was my counterpart. We actually sought advice from the Naval Observatory to find out when was the best time to change time, knowing that we had done that for some 50 years. The Naval Observatory made a couple of suggestions, which we took up. So we started it a little bit earlier in October, and we went a little bit, we went a little later, actually, the first Sunday in November, and we went a little bit earlier, which is the second weekend in March. One of the reasons why we did November was because Halloween, sometimes it changed on Halloween. And you take that extra hour away of trick-or-treaters, that's the #1 death day for kids running between parked cars. You take that hour of sunlight away, and that tragically is a bad day, which is why we moved it to November instead of October. Now, there's a lot of myths about daylight savings time. I can't dispel them all. I'm not even going to go after the Arkansas Gazette, which ran a story blaming a tree disease spread by beetles on daylight savings time because they had that extra hour. A little bit off the wall. I won't touch that one. But Richard Burr, then on the committee, demanded a study by the Department of Energy to make sure that, in fact, we did save energy. In fact, a year or two later, the Department of Energy confirmed that we actually do save energy, something important in today's world. We talked to law enforcement. It does actually reduce crime. Why is that? Because most crime happens at dusk. And so if you extend that hour, folks are able to get home. And I can remember, well, we know those stories. It saves lives, not only Halloween, but I believe it was AAA that said it actually saved a number of lives because most accidents occur with people tired, coming home from work. Kids, they drive more than ever before now, coming home from school. It used to be you took the bus. Now it seems like a lot of kids take the car. So again, those after-school activities, another thing, you have that extra hour, so it extends dusk, so you don't have as many accidents and you actually save lives. We're going to hear today about benefiting the economy. I mean, just think about the barbecues. Think about outdoor recreation. Maybe you can play 18 holes of golf instead of 9. I'm not a golfer, but maybe someday. Think about garden work. Coming home and working in your garden, all those different things, you have that extra hour that's nice. Usually, of course, spring starts with this. Couple things. I support states' rights. So one of the things that we did now, Arizona and Hawaii, they both don't acknowledge daylight saving time, which is fine. Indiana, we worked very closely with Mitch Daniels. That was a divided state, and we actually had a provision to save that. I support states having the rights to decide whether they want to be in or out. I know that's been an issue in the Sunshine State. I think that would be worthy of changing. I also, if I had to do it all over again, I might have said, you know, it ought to start Saturday morning instead of Sunday. So you have that extra day to get ready for the beginning of the week. Whether you lose an hour or not might help some of the outdoor recreation folks as well. So I think that might be important. But at the end of the day, we change the world. The rest of the world changed their time to comply with us. So this is a big thing. If you change it, it's a big thing. The airlines, the cruise industry, the tourists, and often you got confusion. Our state was next to Michigan. We always had, you know, which time zone, you know, is one that flies out of South Bend, which time are you on? So there's a lot of questions. Appreciate the hearing. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman who remembers the earlier debate is an expert on this. And I would now like to introduce our witnesses. I assume all of them are somewhere remotely. I wanted to first introduce Steve Calandrillo, or is it Calandrillo? Calandrillo, I've been told, who is Jeffrey and Susan, what is it, Brothman? Brothman, professor of law at the University of Washington School of Law. Then we have Lyle Beckwith, who is the Senior Vice President of Government Relations at the National Association for Convenience Stores. Dr. Beth Mallow, the professor of neurology and pediatrics and director of the Vanderbilt Sleep Division at the Vanderbilt University Medical Center. So at this time, the chairman will recognize each witness for 5 minutes to provide opening statements. Before we begin, I would like to explain, well, we don't have anyone here in person, so the issue of the lights. There is a timer, however, on the screen that will count down your remaining time. As the timer reaches the 1-minute mark, please begin to wrap up your testimony. So Professor Calandrillo, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Schakowsky, and Ranking Member Milarakis, and Chair Pallone, and Ranking Member Rogers, as well as distinguished members of the Subcommittee on Consumer Protection and Commerce. My name is Steve Calandrillo. I am a professor at the University of Washington School of Law, all the way out on the west edge of our country in Seattle. And I teach contract law, advanced tort law, law and medicine, as well as law and economics. And in that latter course, we studied the cost-benefit analysis of various laws and public policies, including daylight saving time. I started researching this issue 15 or 20 years ago and published a paper in a law review. And since then, I've actually started publishing in mainstream publications that get read by more than just my parents and my best friends. So avenues like the New York Times and CNN and Business Week and Fox News and ABC and CBS, as well as NPR. And I am here today to urge Congress to permanently extend daylight saving time, to make it all year round for 5 important reasons. Number one, the most important reason, permanent daylight saving time would save lives. Darkness kills and sunshine saves. Number two, we're going to talk about the crime reduction that various representatives have already referenced. Daylight saving time prevents crime by as much as 20%. Number three, we're going to talk about the energy savings created by daylight saving time. This was the original justification for daylight saving time. It's no longer as strong as it used to be, but it still does save energy. Number four, I want to discuss avoiding switching the clocks twice a year. As many representatives have alluded to, people don't like changing their clocks twice a year, and it's more than just dislike. It messes up circadian rhythms, disrupts your sleep cycles, and has all kinds of health and economic effects. But permanent daylight saving time can stop that. And lastly, the fifth reason for going to permanent daylight saving time is that business and recreational interests will flourish in the evening sunshine. So I'll take all 5 of those in turn. First, lives saved. Darkness kills, sunshine saves. That's what I like to say to my students. And darkness is twice as deadly in the evening hours as it is in the early morning hours before sunrise. The evening rush hour is much more fatal than the morning rush hour for various reasons. There's more people on the road. There's more alcohol in drivers' bloodstreams. People are tired and rushing to get home, and that's when they make mistakes. More children are outdoors enjoying unsupervised play, and it leads to lots of accidents. In fact, fatal vehicle on pedestrian crashes skyrocket 3-fold once we hit the twilight hour, once the sun goes down. Susan Ferguson's research showed a 300% increase in fatalities. Obviously, it's a lot harder to see that kid running across the street once it's dark outside, once there's sunset. And the idea of daylight saving time is it moves 1 hour from the morning into the late afternoon/evening, making it safer for drivers, making it safer for pedestrians. In fact, a meta-study by Rutgers researchers Coate and Markowitz demonstrated that 343 lives per year could be saved on net if we move to permanent daylight saving time. Obviously, the morning would be more dangerous, but the afternoon would be much, much more safer than the morning was. Crime would decrease if we had daylight saving time year round. Darkness is a friend of crime. Criminals like to do their work in the evening darkness, not the morning darkness. It's the evening hours where crime spikes between 6 p.m. to midnight. That's the most dangerous time of year. And daylight saving time has the effect of taking 1 hour out of their workday, right? Criminals are late to bed and late to rise. They don't tend to commit crimes at 6 a.m., but 6 p.m. is a different story. Third, energy savings. As Representative Upton noted, this was the justification for daylight saving time in World War I, in World War II, in the 1973 OPEC oil embargo. We wanted to save barrels of oil. Same thing with 2007 when daylight saving time got extended. And the reason is that if the sun is still out later in the afternoon, when 99% of the population is awake, right, the sun can help heat your house, keep your business, and also light your house and light your business. Now, that argument has diminished somewhat over time, as he mentioned, but it's still true. The studies on the majority still show an energy savings from daylight saving time. Fourth, let's avoid the biannual clock switch. That's what most Americans are objecting to. It's not daylight saving time so much, right? We're on daylight saving time 8 months out of the year. In fact, standard time is a little bit of a misnomer because it's only 4 months out of the year. But if we went to permanent daylight saving time, we would no longer have the clock switch. That would protect circadian rhythms. And then finally, recreation and commerce interests flourish in the sun. I know other witnesses will testify as to that, but obviously it's a lot easier to get off your screens and go outside and enjoy a walk, a jog, play with your kids in the backyard. It's a lot easier to go out shopping if there's still sunlight out. With that, I see my time is up. I apologize for going over, but I thank you very much for listening to me today.
I thank the gentleman, and now Ms. Beckwith, Mr. Beckwith, you are now recognized for 5 minutes. Are you there, Mr. Beckwith?
I apologize. I thought I had hit the unmute button. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you, we can't see you.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Lyle Beckwith. I'm Senior Vice President of Government Relations for the National Association of Convenience Stores, or NACS as we like to call it. I appreciate the opportunity to come here today to discuss this issue. I actually started working for NACS in the mid-'80s, and this issue was the first issue I worked on. So I'm looking forward to sharing my historic perspective on this, but more so I'm looking forward to the conversation we'll have afterwards, and I'll do my best to answer your questions the best of my ability. As I will explain, I'm going to read a brief statement. As I'll explain, the bottom line is that daylight savings time is good for business and commerce across the United States, and our industry urges you to keep it in place. By way of background, NACS is an international trade association representing the convenience store industry with more than 1,500 retail and 1,600 supplier companies as members, the majority of whom are based in the United States. NACS represents over 150,000 domestic stores, and that represents approximately 80% of the retail motor fuel sales in the United States. The convenience industry employs about 2.34 million workers and generated more than $548 billion in total sales in 2020, representing more than 3% of the U.S. gross domestic product. Of those sales, approximately $292 billion come from fuel sales alone. We conduct more than 160 million transactions every day. That equates to about half the U.S. population on a daily basis. 93% of Americans live within 10 minutes of one of our store's locations. These businesses are particularly important in rural and urban areas of the country that might not have as many large businesses available. In these locations, the convenience store not only serves as the place to get fuel, but is often the grocery store and center of the community. Daylight saving time was employed at different points during the 20th century, as we've all heard, previously the history of this. As I said, NACS has been involved in previous discussions of this. Switching between daylight saving time and standard time is, of course, a balancing act. None of us can change how much sunlight there is in a given day. As much as it appears, Congress does not have the power to change time. Congress has the power to balance time, but the day is going to be the same length regardless of what we do here today. None of us. There are many benefits to having more time when it's light in the afternoon or early evening, and we've heard these as well. They include increasing economic activity as well as reduced motor vehicle accidents. But the benefits have always been weighed against the concerns that we should not have kids going to school in the dark in the morning. So this is balancing between the various interests that led us to the longstanding policy of switching our clocks in the spring and fall to take the most advantage of the daylight that we can every year. As I said, next testified in favor of extending daylight savings time before an Energy and Commerce subcommittee as early as 1983 and has supported extensions of the policy. While there are questions about how much, if any, energy is saved with daylight saving, the majority of studies show that reduced use of electricity for lighting does decrease overall energy demand. That's been one of the overriding points of public discussion regarding the use of daylight saving time, but there are other reasons that moving from standard time to daylight savings time in the spring is good policy. Our industry has consistently found that commerce increases when the nation moves to daylight saving time. When the clocks change in the spring, people feel as though they have more time after work to engage in the range of activities that increase commerce, from eating out to shopping to participating in or taking kids to a variety of outdoor activities. They consistently show increased spending when daylight hours are shifted later in the day throughout daylight saving. One study compared spending changes when daylight saving started and stopped in Los Angeles with spending in Phoenix, which does not observe daylight saving time. The result was clear increases in spending in Los Angeles when daylight saving started and losses of spending when it ended. For the convenience industry specifically, 76.5% of sales come during the part of the year when we're on daylight savings time, yet a significantly higher percentage than the 65% of the year we spend using daylight saving time. Overall, this means about $5 billion in incremental sales for the industry attributable to the change. Those are big numbers. The legislative record of past debates of these policies showed consistent statements regarding the benefit to the economy of daylight saving time. Everyone understands that changing the clocks can be annoying. We all lose that hour of sleep in the spring and can feel tired adjusting to the change. But my personal experience and the evidence of our behavior shows that we're all pretty happy to have that extra hour of daylight later in the day when we go home. It matters more than you think when you look at the shopping as well as the data behavior. I know I'm running out of time, so I'm going to suspend the rest of my written testimony, and I look forward to having a dialogue with you on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I recognize Dr. Mallow for your 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Schakowsky, Ranking Member Bilirakis, and other members of the committee. I really appreciate being able to participate in this important hearing today. My name is Dr. Beth Mallow. I'm a practicing neurologist and sleep medicine specialist at Vanderbilt University Medical Center in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm here today in my personal capacity as a sleep clinician and researcher, and in coordination with my colleagues at the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, the National Sleep Foundation, the Society for Research on Biological Rhythms, and the Sleep Research Society, all of whom support permanent standard time as the healthy choice. I commend the subcommittee for thoughtfully considering changes to daylight saving time, which I'll refer to as DST, including consequences related to the health and the well-being of the American people. I strongly recommend both eliminating the transition back and forth to DST, as others have mentioned, and adopting permanent standard time. In my opinion, and in the opinion of other sleep medicine experts, doing so would have multiple positive health benefits. Most Americans favor those abrupt transitions between standard time and DST. And as we've heard, there is a lot of inconvenience. But there are clear adverse health effects attributed to this abrupt transition every March as well. And in a 2020 commentary published in JAMA Neurology, my coworkers and I reviewed the evidence linking the annual transition to DST to increased strokes, heart attacks, and adolescent sleep deprivation. And I've included those details in my written testimony. I'd be happy to elaborate on any of those studies in the Q&A portion of this hearing. Now, if there's general agreement that transitioning back and forth between standard time and DST is not only unpopular, but detrimental to health, then we're faced with the question, where do we land? And this morning, my goal is to talk with you about clock changes and how they affect health, address your questions about the science of sleep and circadian rhythms, and present the accumulating evidence for why permanent standard time is the healthy choice. I'll be talking a lot about sunshine today and sunlight. And permanent standard time maximizes sunlight in the winter mornings when we need abundant light to wake up and become alert, and minimizes sunlight late into the summer evenings when too much light can work against our sleep. It's called standard time because standard time lines up with our natural biological rhythms. Some Americans, including our essential workers who need to report by 7 a.m. or earlier, really stand to benefit from permanent standard time. And roughly half of our K through 12 students need to be in school before 8 a.m., with many school districts starting in the 7 to 7:30 a.m. time range. Our students and many American workers are at risk for chronic sleep loss and also what's called circadian misalignment. It basically refers to a mismatch in the timing between our work, our school, our sleep routines, and the sun, that all important light signal from the outside world. Chronic sleep loss, circadian misalignment, or both make us more prone to a whole host of detrimental health effects throughout the lifespan, including obesity, diabetes, ADHD, depression, cardiovascular disease, cancer, and Alzheimer's disease. People with disabilities are also more susceptible to clock changes. I work on how to help children with autism sleep better, and I've cared for multiple children whose sleep worsens after this change to DST, with more meltdowns, more hyperactivity, with the changes lasting weeks, very stressful to their parents. And effective interventions for sleep problems in autism include limiting evening light, maximizing morning light. Permanent standard time would optimize both of those interventions. In summary, my colleagues and I strongly recommend eliminating the transition back and forth to DST and adopting permanent standard time, the natural and healthy choice. I'm looking forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
I neglected to mention that any members who want to put an opening statement into the record, it will be part of that, part of the record. So we have concluded with the witnesses' opening statements. At this time, we will move to member questions. Each member will have 5 minutes to ask questions of the witnesses. Since we have witnesses that are presenting remotely, I need to ask my colleagues in this hearing room to mute themselves whenever you're asking a question, but after you ask your question and not speaking, and it definitely helps to more clearly hear the witnesses that when they speak, if you are muted at that time. I will start with by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. And we know that this issue of daylight saving time has been gaining traction and becoming more widely talked about. This Sunday, we will move our clocks up an hour, 1 hour forward. To each of you, if you could very briefly just say whether or not you think we need to end the practice of changing our clocks, or do you think that there is a benefit to keeping the status quo, that is going forward and backward. So if I could begin with Professor Calandrillo, what is your preference? We can go into more detail later, but what do you think?
Yeah, certainly, I would like to see us stop the biannual clock switch and move to permanent DST.
Dr. Mallow.
Yes, I would agree. There are both health impacts as well as a lot of inconvenience to people. So I would say it's time to stop going back and forth.
Okay, and Mr. Beckwith?
Yeah, we support the current system as it is because we think there's been a lot of thought into balancing the needs of commerce on one end, and as I said, having kids being able to walk to school when it's light out during the winter time. So we support keeping the status quo.
Got it. The American people actually believe that it is time to end the clock changing. A recent study showed that over 70% of Americans are in favor of a systematic, of a system where we no longer switch our clocks. Again, this question is for each of you. If you had then, and I think, you know, we heard a bit more, but you may want to elaborate. If you had to choose between the status quo of changing our clocks, permanent daylight saving time, or permanent standard time, which would you choose, or is there a someplace in the middle in your view? So again, Professor Calandrillo.
Yeah, of course, not giving away my punchline already. Permanent daylight saving time has enormous net economic and health benefits.
Okay, and Dr. Mallow?
Yes, I am on the opposite side. I think that permanent standard time is the way to go, would be my first choice.
And Mr. Beckwith, I guess you said that. You might want to reiterate a reason why you think it's important to maintain the status quo.
Well, I think it's a balancing act, and we're taking into account both of the discussions in doing so. If there were to be a change, however, we would support permanent daylight savings time.
Okay. Thank you. So there is a vote that's been called. What we're going to do right now then is recess, if that's all right with my co-chair. Not co-chair, my ranking member. I do that all the time. My ranking member, and then we'll come back and finish the questioning and hopefully then conclude our hearing. I appreciate the cooperation of our witnesses and members. So let's recess right now, and we'll come back after.
Okay. We're going to count down from 5, and then we'll bring the This meeting is now out of recess, and we're back in order. First order of business is I will recognize Congressman Bilirakis for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it very much. And I want to thank the witnesses again for your valuable insights to this discussion. Mr. Calandrillo, I hope I pronounced it right. In your testimony, you speak to several reasons why daylight in the evening will make our roads safer. Numbers from NHTSA were recently released on the number of deaths that occur on our roads each year. They are staggering and frankly unacceptable as far as I'm concerned. We have to do better, and it starts with the subcommittee acting on legislation that my friend Representative Bob Latta has led on for the last 5 years for advanced driving systems and autonomous vehicles to ensure America leads in these new technologies. So Mr. Calandrillo, again, question, can you elaborate on the dangers both our children and senior citizens face in the evening when it gets dark, sooner during standard time? Obviously, that's a big issue for my district in Florida.
No. Thank you so much, Ranking Member Bilirakis. Another Greek American who's wonderful, like my wife, Krissa. It's excited to hear your question because, I care a lot about traffic fatalities, and the evening rush hour, as I mentioned in my opening, is twice as dangerous as the morning rush hour, right? Many more people on the road, much more alcohol systems, and many more car accidents. 300% increase in vehicle on pedestrian fatalities once twilight hits, according to Susan Ferguson. We need to push sunlight into the evening. That's when people can benefit from it. That's the most dangerous time to drive compared to the morning. Now, I am sensitive to childhood fatalities, especially. I got 4 young school kids myself, and you don't want to be sending them to school in the early morning darkness, right? It's a trade-off, and I get that, and I'm very sensitive to that. One of the ways you can deal with that problem is by starting school times later. Certainly in Florida, I know this was experimented with. We need to be pushing back school times, especially for teenagers. My teenager, I don't think, has seen the sunrise in a year or two. They don't like to wake up early. We shouldn't be having school at 7 or 7:30 p.m. or a.m. for them. And if we pushed it back, we could deal with some of the danger of early morning darkness that would be created by daylight saving time.
I happen to agree. 7:20 is when my kids started high school, and I thought that was always too early. Actually, I started at 7:20 as well. So, but that's a great reason to start a little later. So, Dr. Mallow, I want to ask you a similar question because in your testimony you included graphic comparing the difference in daylight savings or daylight in different cities during daylight saving time. I agree, there are stark differences in the pictures, but I'm curious about the flip side. If children are playing in the streets at 4 p.m. or if they're playing in their driveways, what have you, at 4 p.m., and all of a sudden it gets dark, and that's true in some parts of the country, this may impact their ability to get enough exercise during the day, which I think is crucial, which, as we know, again, is critical for the health and safety of our kids. This is especially true in the past few years as our kids are increasingly addicted to social media, unfortunately, and screen time. Do you have any concerns about the level of childhood activity that may be impacted by potential shift to standard time permanently? Again, the question is for Dr. Mallow.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that physical activity in kids is really important, and it's a complicated issue because it's not just light, it's also how tired they are, what's going on in their schools. I do want to commend Dr. Witness Calandrillo for his emphasis on later school start times. I think that is a really important piece of the puzzle, but it's not the only puzzle. I think if our kids are waking up, getting that bright light in the morning, it resets their clock for the night as well, and they can get much more sleep. Sleep deprivation is improved when you expose people to bright light in the morning because it synchronizes your clock, and I can talk more about that later. So I would say it's a complex issue, and bright light in the morning is a piece of the puzzle that will help our kids get more sleep.
The gentleman yield back the balance of his time. Next, I'll recognize the chairman of the full committee, Chairman Pallone, for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. We heard today, of course, that changing our clocks twice a year severely impacts our health, and over the years, the science continues to get clearer that sleep is vital for our health and well-being. So let me start with Dr. Mallow. In your testimony, you speak to how sleep loss and changing sleep patterns can have a major effect on our health. Can you elaborate on those concerns and how stopping spring-forward, fall-back time changes could help alleviate some of those negative health impacts?
Yes. I just want to make sure I understand the question. So,
Well, you know, actually,
how
I can
does-
combine two questions, if you don't mind, Doctor. First, I'm trying to
Okay,
find
sure.
out, you know, how we can, how if you got rid of the changing it twice a year and just either had it all daylight or all standard time, that would alleviate some of the health impacts. And then more about how we should be thinking about kids in the context of that. I'm an advocate for getting rid of the changing it. I haven't decided yet whether I want daylight or standard, but I don't think we should go back and forth.
Right. So starting with that issue, the going back and forth really briefly, and then I'll get to the other one. Where should we go with that? I think that there is clear evidence that going back and forth not only affects adults with the heart attacks and strokes, but also affects our kids, particularly with teen sleep deprivation. Teens are really susceptible because as we go through puberty, our melatonin, our natural melatonin levels are pushed later, and we just have a really hard time going to sleep, particularly as teens. And then you throw in everything else that's going on with teens and in terms of school and all, and it really could create a lot of sleep deprivation, the school start times that were mentioned that are oftentimes very early. So I do think there is a big argument for child health, teen health, by getting rid of this transition back and forth. Now, the reason I think permanent standard time is the healthy choice is because we need light in the morning to become alert, to get ourselves going. The kids need to be alert to go to school, to learn. They're also oftentimes on the road driving in the dark. And there have been multiple studies that have shown that motor vehicle crashes are more common when kids are driving to school in really early morning hours, like the 7 o'clock hour versus the 8 o'clock hour. So that's one area where kids are really affected, and the permanent standard time would make a huge difference. And then we also see the impacts of sleep loss in these kids on depression, ADHD, self-harm, obesity, which is a huge issue right now in our kids. So there's a lot of health aspects where getting more sleep, which would happen when you get that bright light in the morning to wake you up, get you going, makes it easier to go to sleep at night, and having less of that late evening light, which can really mess up our sleep patterns. All of that, the early morning light, less light in the evening, would be promoted by having permanent standard time adopted.
Thank you. Now, let me just say this. We know that the economy is hurt by changing our clocks. Workers lose productivity, workplace injuries rise. So let me just ask Mr. Calandrillo, I only have a minute. In your testimony, you mentioned the stock market averages a negative return on the Monday following when we switch our clocks. What other parts of the economy see a swing when we change our clocks?
Thank you so much, Chair Palone. I really appreciate that. From my great home state of New Jersey, where I was born and raised, really appreciate the emphasis on not just the health effects, but also the economic effects. As Dr. Mallow says, right, so changing the clocks is the most responsible for health impacts. And as far as the economic impacts, right, commerce flourishes in the sunshine, right? People feel a lot safer going out to the store to go shopping in the evening sunshine. You don't do a lot of that at 6 a.m. You do a lot of that at 6 p.m. in the after school hours or after work hours. That's when people go out and engage in economic commerce. And so that's why putting an hour of sunlight there helps aid that process.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman yields back. Ms. Rogers?
Not here. Mr. Upton's not here. Lotta.
Okay, next we'll go to Congressman Lotta for his 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And today we are in committee to examine daylight savings time. The question is this the topic on the top of our constituents' mind right now? I haven't had a constituent write to my office since October 2020 about daylight savings time. What they are contacting me about is, of course, the invasion of the Ukraine, rising gas prices, and inflation. The other things we should be talking about is American energy independence. Last year, the United States purchased approximately $17.3 billion in crude oil and petroleum products from Russia. That money is being pumped into Putin's economy and turned into the usage of war against Ukraine. Examining on how we can keep our community safe and stopping the spread of illegal substances such as fentanyl, and the emergency fentanyl scheduling expires on the 11th. You might say, well, this is the Consumer Protection Subcommittee. We don't have jurisdiction over those issues. In that case, let's talk about the important issues that we could be examining in a hearing today. Autonomous vehicles, as our ranker mentioned a little bit earlier, a national privacy standard, holding big tech accountable. While we've had a few hearings, we need to have more because of the attention that it needs. Cybersecurity, especially how it relates to securing our systems against bad actors like Russia. Ongoing issues with WHOIS availability so that our law enforcement can track down bad actors online. Oversight of the FTC. The commission has been pretty busy. We should have them before us so we can perform our oversight role. The questions surrounding artificial intelligence as counterparts in Europe set down their own standards, leaving us to catch up. It is my sincere hope that we move forward this Congress. We can have hearings in this committee and subcommittee aimed to address the issues that are affecting the day-to-day lives of Americans. But moving on to today's topic. One of the, it had been talked a little bit earlier, but I'd like to maybe go back and examine it again and ask a few questions. Dr. Mallow, if I could ask you, when you look at the question about kids going to school earlier in the morning, and again, I live more on the western side of the Eastern time zone, but you had some photos in your testimony about showing what 8 a.m. looks like across different areas and different times. And so I'm just kind of curious, in your research, again, if I could bring it up again, the safety factors of kids, I know it was mentioned a little bit earlier, maybe that starting schools later, but a lot of that you can't start schools because they're set to a certain time. But the safety issues for children going to school, especially in the dark, have you done any research on accidents and things like that?
Yes, thank you so much for asking that. There are quite a few studies that have been done, and some of them are in my testimony. I can send others. I'll just quote one, which was done in Virginia. It was published in the last few years, but it looked at 2009 to 2011, and the teen drivers who were driving at, let's say, they had school starting at 7:20 in the morning. They had much higher crash rates than those with start times at 8:45 a.m. And it was attributed to driving to school in the dark and being sleep deprived. And what the issue there is, when we're sleepy, we not only have that tendency to want to fall asleep and drift off at the wheel, but we're also more likely to take risks. We're more likely to text while driving or not wear our seatbelt. So those are really important issues, and permanent standard time by maximizing light in the morning, particularly in those areas you mentioned, those western edge of time zones where it's even darker in the morning, or I should say it doesn't become light at the same time as the rest of the country as easily. Those are specific areas that would benefit from permanent standard time.
Well, thank you. Well, my work with working on autonomous vehicles, one of the things we know is that, unfortunately, traffic accidents are up across the country. When you look at 94% of automobile accidents are caused by driver error. And unfortunately, in the last, when we look at the statistics from 2020, we see that pedestrian deaths have gone up. And interesting, unfortunately, when you look at this going up 5% from the year before, and 7 states in particular have more than half of the deaths, and that's Arizona, California, Florida, Georgia, New York, North Carolina, and Texas. And so, I worry about not only the kids going to school in the dark, but also when you think about our morning runners, walkers, and bike riders out there. So, as we proceed, we have to look at all these factors because, again, we want to make sure that the roads are safe out there. The roads are safe for our kids and for the people that use them, either the motorists or the people walking, riding, or running beside them. And so, Mr. Chairman, I have a couple of seconds left, but I will yield back the balance of my time. Thank you very much.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Next, I will recognize Congressman Rush for his 5 minutes.
I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this outstanding and critical hearing. Dr. Mallow, in your testimony, you discussed, and I quote, adverse health effects that comes from changing our clock twice a year. And as we have seen time and time again, it's a fact that across multiple sectors, when white America gets a cold, Black America gets pneumonia. That stated, is there any evidence that this trend holds here in this particular topic that we're discussing? Specifically, are these negative consequences felt more acutely or more permanently in low income or minority communities? If so, can you please discuss why this exists?
Thank you for that question very much. Yes, I do feel that people of low income, regardless of color, are susceptible to these effects even more of sleep loss. And the reason I say that is some of us are able to wake up and roll out of bed and join a Zoom meeting, but some of us can't. Some of us have to be at work, essential workers, for example, at 6 a.m., 6:30, 7 a.m. when it's pitch dark outside. And that really puts a burden on people who can't control their hours. And that's, to me, that and the students are the two groups that are most vulnerable to it being dark in the morning, because they don't get as much sleep at night, because, as I said, you need that light to synchronize your rhythms. And there's also this concept I mentioned in my statement called circadian misalignment, where when you're trying to go somewhere in pitch black and you're turning on artificial lights and you're trying to drive somewhere to get to your job, that's where we start seeing obesity, cancer, all these whole hosts of detrimental effects. And people who can't control their hours, like those who have lower socioeconomic, potentially some racial differences as well, are going to be more susceptible to those health effects. So they're quite vulnerable.
So would you elaborate on the changing time and the negative effects on the mental health conditions of our citizens of our nation? Specifically, is the change in time responsible for producing or exacerbating any mental health symptoms or illnesses
Yes, and again, I want to say mental health is a complicated thing. It's not just one thing, but there is literature to support that depression and other mental health issues, ADHD, are affected by not having proper sleep. And we know that the idea of permanent standard time would maximize sleep. It's the right choice for sleep. And everything else, all those health benefits would then follow from adapting the permanent standard time.
So does the lack of sleep, does that in any way hamper your ability to cope with the normal one might consider stress or exacerbated stress in one's life?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, we all know how we feel when we're sleep deprived. We're more apt to send that email we'll regret later. I've just experienced sleep deprivation the last few days because I've been working to get this brief done and testify today. And it reminded me how when I don't get my 7 to 8 hours of sleep, how I just don't feel like I'm fully on my game. And that affects mood, that affects irritability, that affects how we talk to each other as American citizens. So I'm a huge advocate. That's why I'm a sleep specialist in getting enough sleep. And again, that permanent standard time would promote more sleep for most of us.
And my last question, I only have a few seconds. Is your calendar open for about 400 members of Congress to be your patients?
Absolutely. We'll accommodate you all.
Thank you. And you're back, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Next, I'll recognize Congresswoman Rogers, the ranking member of the full committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Beckwith, today is the National Association of Convenience Stores Fly-In Day. I'm looking forward to meeting with a couple of your colleagues from my home district, Dan Alsacker and Tammy Hedrick. I know you're busy with the fly-in, and so I really appreciate you joining us. In your testimony, you reference a study that compared the spending changes in LA, which observes daylight savings time, and Phoenix, which does not. While the results of this study found that spending in LA increased during daylight savings time and decreased in standard time, I believe it's important to highlight two bordering states that use different practices for determining the time. Currently, the patchwork of state privacy and data security laws continues to increase, and that will lead to greater confusion for businesses and consumers. I fear that the same may occur with the fragmented daylight savings time practices. Can you speak to any potential burdens your members may face in each state when they are choosing whether to recognize the permanent standard time, permanent daylight time, or remain status quo?
Thank you for the question. Absolutely. First of all, we completely agree with you on data security, that needs to be standardized. When we look at daylight savings time, it's far less clear. I put in my written testimony, that I think it's a misnomer to call it daylight saving time. It's really daylight optimization time. It recognizes the fact that the days get shorter in the winter and get longer in the summer. And that's exacerbated the further away from the equator you get. So the northern states have a far greater effect of that. I think it's really helpful in this discussion to also utilize time zones as a point of reference. So we all acknowledge that the sun rises differently in Washington, D.C. than it does at a different time in Los Angeles. And so we have different time zones. And yet it's an imperfect system because you have to draw the line somewhere. And eventually you're going to have that weird situation somewhere in America where it's 7 o'clock on one side of the street and 8 o'clock on the other side of the street. And yet we understand the value of having different time zones. So certainly there are situations where communities or states are less affected by the time change. But, either they're close to a time zone change or they're farther south and the days, the difference between day length isn't that significant between winter and summer. And so certainly there's room for flexibility, and that flexibility exists right now in certain communities where it just doesn't work for them. But as a general rule, having the same type of time change around the country makes sense. So everyone is working off the same clock. So yes, there's room for exceptions because it is an imperfect system, but in general, it's good for everyone to adhere by basically the same rules.
Thank you. I appreciate that insight. Mr. Calandrillo, it's great having a Washington Husky with us today. Thank you for participating, and you've done a lot of work around this. Would you comment on the potential patchwork of state bills from a broader economic and industry perspective, and specifically some of the industries like airlines?
Yeah, thank you so much, Ranking Member Rogers. I really appreciate the UW shout out too. Right, we want to have uniformity generally. I mean, that's why Congress passed the Uniform Time Act back in 1966, because at the time, different states and different cities were observing different clocks. And so Minneapolis, Minnesota was on a different clock than St. Paul, Minnesota, which is right across the river, and that creates confusion. So that's why we passed the Uniform Time Act, which says if you're going to spring forward, it's got to be on the same day as everybody else. If you're going to fall back, it's got to be on the same day as everybody else. And that helps. That uniform certainly does help commerce. So I'm in favor of that. But I want to make it clear, I favor the permanent daylight saving time. We talked about the safety issues just a few minutes ago. The National Safety Council found that pedestrians would be safer with daylight saving time than with standard time. We don't want sunlight at 4:30 a.m. in the morning for economic and health reasons. I assure you, if we had standard time, and that was the sunrise time, 4:24 a.m., New York City, and start of summer, nobody's going to be out as a pedestrian at that time observing it, and nobody's out engaging in commerce at 4:30 a.m. Right? We need to put the hour of the sunlight into the day, part of the day where it matters most. That's what Ben Franklin talked about centuries ago in his satirical discussion of the waste of daylight. Certainly, in terms of economics, all the chambers of commerce, I shouldn't say all, but the great majority, including the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, says the economic effects of daylight savings times are dramatically positive.
Great. Appreciate the inspiration of Ben Franklin. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back the balance of her time. And I will now recognize Congresswoman Trahan for her 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Last Tuesday, during his first State of the Union address, the President highlighted an issue I know my colleagues care deeply about, and that's youth mental health. The issue has been one of the centerpieces of my legislative agenda. In fact, in March, I joined the chair, Congressman Cardenas, to introduce Youth Mental Health and Suicide Prevention Act, legislation to support positive mental health promotion and suicide prevention programs in high schools. The bill would authorize HHS to establish a grant program for school districts to strengthen behavioral health services, awareness, and address mental health and suicide prevention needs. Additionally, I have worked with Congresswoman Castor to continually advocate for kids' safety online, aiming to create online spaces that have a positive impact on youth mental health through the Kids Internet Design and Safety Act, or KIDS. And most recently, my office has been investigating online suicide forums and the ways they encourage and provide instruction to struggling youth. These are big issues. They require new regulations, new funding streams, and agency resources. Today, we're talking about something that may feel simple to a lot of folks, changing clocks, but changing clocks can impact teen mental health, and that is what I want to explore today. Dr. Mallow, can you speak as to why a consistent sleep pattern is important for teen brain development and mental health?
Yes, thank you so much for that question. And I referenced in my written testimony a consensus statement of the American Academy of Sleep Medicine on health and the consequences for our kids. I was fortunate enough to be one of the authors on this. It was published in 2016, but I think things are even more grim these days with teen mental health. And we basically talked about what are the consequences when kids are not getting the sleep they need. And we specifically talked about mental health, including risk of self-harm, suicide thoughts, and suicide attempts. So I really appreciate you bringing this forward. When kids are sleeping better, they're less apt to take a role in risk-taking activity and suicide issues. And the best way, I think there's two simple things our country could do at either the state level with the later school start times that's been brought up by others today. And then, of course, having more light in the morning to promote sleep, which would be the permanent standard time. And I so commend you for bringing that up, because I think that the mental health of our children is critical right now.
Thank you, Doctor. Professor Calandrillo, how could extra sunlight in the evening encourage outdoor play? Have you seen any data regarding an increase in outdoor play correlating with less screen time for children?
I really appreciate that question. And I agree with everything that Dr. Mallow and you just said, but I actually think that the mental health issue and certainly the screen time issue, these are all bettered by permanent daylight saving time, not permanent standard time. No kids going out to play at 4:30 a.m. or 5:30 a.m. or 6:30 a.m. in the morning. They do that at 4:30 or 5:30 or 6:30 p.m. And that's what gets kids outside, like my kids, enjoying outdoor unsupervised. And by the way, in terms of the mental health goals, right, there is a big problem with seasonal affective disorder and depression if you don't have sunlight in the part of the day when you're awake to use it, which is the afternoon and evening. 99% of the public is awake, kids are awake. They're not, only half of America is awake in the morning. We need to, I think the depression statistics, the other health outcome measures, the other economic measures, all would be served by moving that hour into the part of the day when more people can use it.
Well, thank you for that. Mr. Beckwith, do you have anything to add?
I'm not a doctor, so I don't really have anything to comment about mental health. I will comment briefly, though. The comment that moving the clock ahead 1 hour once a year is dangerous really begs the common sense question. If that's true, we have bigger problems. If you look at your colleagues, every Sunday or Monday, the majority of your colleagues are returning from their districts. And they're returning with 1, 2, 3 hours of sleep deprivation. And let's not even talk about the ones from Hawaii, Alaska. So if setting the clocks ahead 1 hour is dangerous, flying east is deadly.
Thank you for that. Look, mental health challenges have become a national crisis, and as a mother of 5, this issue hits home, and it's worth thinking about a variety of legislative approaches that could address the problem, including putting an end to changing the clocks. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back the balance of her time. Next, I'll recognize Congressman Dunn for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm keenly aware of the arguments regarding daylight savings times for Florida, where any average day is so enjoyable, so healthy, so full of beauty that it seems only logical that many of our residents and our over 100 million tourists a year are longing to extend every day. I confess, however, that I was surprised, shocked even, that this subject took central stage in the deliberations of this committee at this particular moment in history. Like all of us gathered here, my days, nights, weeks, and weekends have been consumed for months with our efforts to avoid war, save our brave Ukrainian friends, and unify our NATO allies so that this barbaric invasion does not spill over into even more of Europe, thus precipitating the most dangerous possibility of thermonuclear war that we have seen since the Cuban Missile Crisis. We also need to restore our energy independence, gone now for just 1 year. It seems so long ago. January of 2021, American independence was real. I was paying $2 a gallon for gas. Energy independence for the free world is a vitally important goal for international security, for life, and for liberty. And crime, my God, the crime wave we face with our defunded and demoralized police, still heroic law enforcement officers at all levels. Surely this subject commands our attention. I know that our sheriffs and police would be grateful if we focused some of our attention and time on the massive human trafficking operations on our southern border that pour billions of dollars into the drug cartels' pockets and deliver record amounts of deadly drugs to America at the same time. Sadly, this leads to record numbers of death among our young Americans by overdose and a surge in associated crime. Or we might have devoted this time to examining ways to reverse the highest inflation we've seen in 40 years. Inflation that is rapidly eroding the life savings of many Americans and decreasing real wages for all of us daily. All of these problems have roots in areas that this committee has jurisdiction over. And I know all of our members on both sides of the aisle have ideas about how to help our fellow Americans. However, we've chosen to turn the talents and time of this committee to review the benefits and costs of permanent daylight savings time. Well, for the record, I favor permanent daylight savings time that does not move the current boundaries of time zones. But I don't believe that doing that will improve any of the problems that I just mentioned, all of which still await our urgent attention. With that, Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Next, I'll recognize Congressman McNerney for his 5 minutes.
Well, I thank the chairman. I thank the witnesses. An interesting discussion for sure. One that affects all of us every year. So I'm glad we get it out on the table here. Dr. Marlow, I believe the science surrounding this issue must inform our policy decisions. So how do you view the health benefits of utilizing sunlight versus the health benefits of proper circadian alignment?
Yes, so I think what you're asking is, how does sunlight fit into this whole circadian misalignment issue? Is that correct?
Right.
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that question just so I could clear it up a little bit. So basically, when it's light in the morning, I've explained that gets us going, gets us alert. It actually resets our clock so that it's easier to fall asleep at night. And that's important because we need to get proper sleep so that we can feel good and do all the things that are important for our health. And when we get light too late in the day and in the evening, so basically in the winter, we want to get our light in the mornings, and that's what the permanent standard time would help promote. Now, in the evening, we want to get less light. I'm not talking about 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock at night. I'm talking about 10 o'clock at night. When I lived in Michigan, we would have to postpone fireworks on July 4th until after 10 o'clock because it wasn't dark yet. And that light is what interferes with our falling asleep because we need it to be dark to produce our natural melatonin and help us fall asleep. So as an example, people who are on those western edges of those time zones tend to get less sleep. People have actually documented they get less sleep. They have more health issues like obesity, even cancer has been linked to those western edges because they're not getting enough light in the morning and they're getting too much light in the evening. And that's what contributes to not just sleep deprivation, but that whole mismatch that we refer to as circadian misalignment. And what the permanent daylight time would do is exacerbate that effect because you'd be getting even less light in the morning in the winter and more light in the evening, while permanent standard time, which is more healthy, would promote more sleep, promote more circadian alignment. It's called standard time because it's more natural. It fits our regular sleep-wake patterns and promotes sleep.
I don't want you to filibuster my whole 3 to 5 minutes. How does the impact of changing a clock by 1 hour compare with jet lag for 1 hour difference or for more than 1 hour?
Yeah, and I'll try to be brief. I just had wanted to make sure I got the basic facts in. So it's very different when we go, let's say, from Chicago to DC, because what's happening is we're changing our clock, but we're also changing our environment and we're following the sun. So everything changes, and the sun actually helps us reset our circadian rhythms. But when next weekend, when we turn the clock forward, we're not changing our environment. So it's a very artificial thing. And we're off kilter, we're off sync by an hour for 8 months during the year when we're on the permanent, when we make the change to daylight saving time. So
Okay.
that's the difference.
Professor Calandrillo, in 2011, Russia switched to a permanent daylight savings time, but it was widely unpopular and the decision was reversed in 3 years. The same thing happened in the UK in 1971 and the US in 1974 after complaints about children going to school in the dark and so on. How do proponents of daylight savings time address that sort of issue, that sort of challenge?
Yeah, thank you, Representative. It's a good question. Certainly, we don't want to increase harm to school children in the early morning darkness. And certainly in the 1974 year-round daylight saving time experiment, some of the headlines were school kids were at greater risk in the morning, certainly in Florida and maybe California. But it's important to not just look at anecdotes, but to look at studies, right? The National Safety Council looked at the 1974 data and concluded in 42 states plus Washington, D.C., there was no increase in danger to school children because even though there was more morning darkness, there was much more afternoon sunlight and there was kids saved in the afternoon, but they never made headlines, right? Obviously that accidents in the mornings do make headlines, and it breaks my heart, right? That is a tragedy when that happens. But we have to understand that we need to put the sunlight into the portion of the day when all kids are up and moving around the town, not just the portion of the day when only half are awake. Like I said, 4:30, 5:30, 6:30 a.m., a lot of people are still asleep at that time and no one benefits from sunlight at that time. Whereas if you look at sunset times, 99% of the population is awake and benefits in terms of their health and in terms of the economy.
All right, well, my time's expired, more than expired, so I'm gonna have to yield back. Thank you.
The gentleman yields back. Next, I'll recognize Congresswoman Lesko for her 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the people testifying today. I'm from the great state of Arizona. Dr. Mallow, in your testimony, you spoke about the health benefits of permanent standard time. Arizona has observed permanent standard time for 40 years now. Has there been any medical studies done or medical data to demonstrate that Arizonans are less likely to experience the negative health outcomes you described if we went to permanent daylight time?
That's a great question, and I have not been able to find that. I think most of the work has been done more on these edge effects and all, and trying to look at health issues. So no, I'm going to continue to look for that, and if I find anything, I'll let you know.
Thank you. And I said the same thing to the chairwoman is please don't mess with Arizona. We've been doing this for 40 years. There's differences in the states. In Arizona, it's very hot in the summer. In fact, a lot of our workers that work on rooftops doing new roofs or on the highways, they actually work in the middle of the night because it's just too hot. And so anytime you change anything to Arizona, Arizonans are going to be upset, and it will have consequences that people from the East Coast may not think about. And with that, I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back the balance of her time. I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. I'd like to thank the witnesses for coming today and for your testimony and your opinions and conveying your research to us as well. Also to the chairwoman, thank you so much for having this important issue discussed before the people of our country. And also Ranking Member Bilirakis, thank you so much as well. As was mentioned earlier, there are many, many issues that we could be discussing in this committee. And believe it or not, this committee is a very prolific committee covering probably more issues than any other policy committee in the House or the United States Senate. So with that, I'd like to once again thank all the chairs and ranking members of all the committees for all the important issues that we cover. And we can walk and chew gum at the same time in the United States Congress. And we can talk about time zones and what it does to people, especially our children. So with that, Dr. Mallow, in your testimony, you touch on the effects on transitioning from standard time to daylight savings time every year in March, and the negative effects that are associated with sleep loss has on adolescent attention span and mental health. You mentioned depression specifically. Can you expand on how losing even as little as 30 minutes of sleep can affect adolescent mental health?
Yes, thank you so much for that question. I have been impressed in the work I did with the consensus panel of the American Academy of Sleep Medicine. We reviewed many, many studies, and even a small amount of sleep loss can make a huge difference in how our adolescents feel, and how alert they are in school, their mental health. You know, I know things have been said about the screen time in the afternoons, and I certainly see that it's a complex picture. It's a lot of different things. But I, as a sleep specialist, feel like the root cause of so much of what's going on with our adolescents is the poor sleep and the fact that they're just really sleep deprived. A lot of them aren't even getting 6 hours of sleep a night. And light in the morning would help tremendously, along with, as was mentioned, making school start times later, which would help promote sleep.
I'd like to ask you a question. Dr. Mallow, in your expert opinion, let's just say a child is playing video games for 4, 5, and 6, and 8 hours a day, and what kind of effect could that have on a child's sleep pattern if they're doing something like that in a chronic way, where they're actually doing it daily, they're doing it very consistently, and something that perhaps is a question mark for me is, could that have an effect on a child's sleep?
Yes, for sure. When kids are on their phones, it can affect their sleep patterns. The way I look at it is there's blue light from our phones. You probably have heard about that. Well, sunlight is the most potent source of blue light. So getting those phones out of the bedroom and being turned off at night, and also trying to get rid of some of that excessive light. Again, we're not talking about light at 5 or 6 o'clock. We're talking about light at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock that really interferes with sleep. And sunlight is one of the most potent sources of blue light there is. So it's the key source. So I think we need to do both. We can't say it's just the times. I think we have to look comprehensively at what's going on with our kids.
Well, Doctor, speaking of comprehensively, it just occurred to me that perhaps at least twice a year, maybe we, whether it's state governments, local governments, and federal governments, when people are finally thinking about daylight or darkness and having to change their clocks, maybe that's a great opportunity to remind the American people about maybe some better practices, like how to help people to ask their kids or get their kids to get outside and get some of that sunlight. Do you think it'd be a good practice for us to try to do something like that?
I do. I mean, I take advantage of what I call, and my colleagues call, the twice yearly media blitz related to daylight saving time, going back and forth, to really educate the American public on sleep and its importance, and getting off your phones, getting more exercise, getting more morning light. All of that is super important. I think that's a great point you made.
Well, thank you. I know that some of the testimony has to do with economy and things of that nature, but I think well-educated school kids, if we focus on them, that will definitely contribute to a stronger economy when they are actually better educated and better prepared to enter into the workforce. So whether it's daylight savings time or anything like that, I think it's important for us to recognize that we have opportunities to go ahead and enlist other policies and other activities when people are paying attention to these kinds of things. Next, my time has expired, and I will recognize Congresswoman Dingell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This hearing could not be more timely as we prepare to spring forward this weekend and witness the resulting impacts to our small businesses, economy, and public health. It's our responsibility to weigh the benefits of any potential changes to federal policy regarding standard and daylight savings time. As a member representing Michigan, as you cite in your testimony, Dr. Mallow, this hearing is incredibly impactful for my constituents, and I look forward to the discussion and listening to everybody this morning. This is a question for the entire panel. Do you believe that switching between standard daylight savings times twice a year ultimately has had negative health impacts on Americans? Yes or no? Professor Calandrillo?
Yes, no, I certainly agree the biannual switch is bad, but permanent daylight savings time is the way to solve those health problems.
Thank you. Dr. Mallow?
I would say I'm on the flip side. I agree with Dr. Calandrillo. We shouldn't go back and forth. I think from a health perspective, at least, the permanent standard time is the best healthy choice.
And Mr. Beckwith?
Thank you. I'm not a health expert, so I will abstain from answering that aspect, but I will point out that I fall in the middle between the other two panelists in saying that what we have created in our optimization of daylight really does take into account both of their opinions and tries to find the happy medium.
Which is why we're always back having hearings on this subject. As you all know, this issue hits very close to home, especially for those who have children who have had to deal with cranky babies, or worse yet, cranky teens who haven't gotten enough sleep. Dr. Mallow, can you expand on the impact sleep deprivation has on our overall health, on our minds, our moods, and especially in young children for whom we know sleep is vital?
Yes, thank you for that question. When we're not sleeping well, it has a whole host of ramifications. A lot of them we've talked about already, but just to hit the high points again: obesity, diabetes, heart disease, even cancer and Alzheimer's disease have been linked to either sleep loss or that circadian misalignment, getting our sleep at the wrong time, getting our light at the wrong time. And then children are not exempt. Children are also super affected by these conditions, by depression. We heard earlier about the self-harm, the suicide risks, and by obesity and ADHD. I think it's just really important to recognize that it's a piece of the puzzle, but sleep is a super important piece of the puzzle toward promoting health. And that light in the morning really sets us up for healthy sleep.
So Dr. Miller, can you tell us though why it's harder for the body to adapt to daylight savings time than it is for the body to adapt to a new time zone when traveling?
Yes. When we travel, let's say from Michigan in the Eastern time zone, well, let's take the Central time zone, Chicago in the Central time zone to DC in the Eastern time zone. We are changing our clocks, but also our environment. So the sun cues are there to help us adapt and adjust. When we change our clocks this weekend, we're changing our clocks, but the sun isn't changing. The sun is still in the same place. And because of that, we're off. We're not able to adjust the way we naturally would if we had those environmental cues as well. So it's more detrimental. And then what people forget, they think it's just an hour, right? But it's actually almost 8 months of the year that we're off sync, that we're getting that sunshine when we shouldn't be. You know, we're 1 hour off, so we're not getting as much in the morning and we're getting too much in the evening.
So Dr. Mallow, you mentioned the increased risk of heart attacks and stroke during the springtime change to daylight savings time. What exactly about the loss of sleep causes this? And is this more prevalent among shift workers and those of lower socioeconomic status?
Yes. In a nutshell, because I know we're getting short on time, I would say it's a combination. It's hard to sort out the the change in the sleep, the loss of sleep, as well as I mentioned, the circadian misalignment and being off schedule and off cycle. But we do see it more in vulnerable populations, as you mentioned. I mentioned the cancer was brought up in the article, and the elderly, and then people like shift work who can't control their schedules as much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. Next, I'll recognize Congresswoman Kelly for her 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Calandrillo, I would like to start with you on this topic. You have said stopping the time switch is important, and in your testimony, you have stated that switching to permanent daylight savings time will reduce crime. Can you elaborate more on how that works and what the connection is between time change and crime?
Thank you so much for that question. Darkness is a friend of crime. Sunshine is a great disinfectant. Crime goes dramatically upwards at the 5 p.m., 6 p.m., after school, after work hours, all the way through midnight. People don't like to commit bad acts in sunlight. They would like the cover of darkness. British studies have estimated as much as a 20% reduction in street crime, juvenile crime, vandalism, graffiti, if we take an hour out of criminals' workday. By pushing sunlight into the evening, that has that effect, right? As I like to say, criminals are late to bed and late to rise. They don't wake up with the sunrise, but they do stay up late. And it's important in all of our discussion to not fight human nature. I mean, it'd be awesome if we all woke up with the sunrise, but we're not going to wake up at 4:30 or 5:30 in the morning. We have to recognize human nature. My son, who's in college, has never done that. We have to put those hours of sunlight into the part of the day where kids can use them and enjoy outdoor unsupervised play. And that will help their sleep cycles and certainly help crime and certainly help the economy.
We tend to think of criminals as opportunistic, given that wouldn't they simply take advantage of a different opportunity?
Well, again, like you're taking 1 hour out of their workday. It's true that they could just stay up later, right? They do try to stay up later, but they don't work in morning darkness. So standard time creates morning darkness, right? And at 5 a.m., 6 a.m., crime rates are exceptionally low. That is the lowest hour of crime rate in the day. So it's not like criminals are switching their work to that point of the day. They engage in afternoon and evening criminal activity, and daylight saving time helps prevent that.
Right. Mr. Beckwith, do you agree? Have your member companies raised this issue previously?
Obviously, crime is a huge concern to us, Congresswoman. I take a little different approach than my other witness here. That it reminds me of the discussions many years ago when farmers were concerned about daylight savings time, that their cows wouldn't know when to be milked. And the response is the cows know when to be milked. You just have to adjust to when they're ready. And I look at crime the same way. Is I don't think criminals care what time it is. They just want to rob you when it's dark out. And so, I think certainly is an issue for us, but I put less emphasis on it for our industry for that reason.
Okay, thank you. Did you want to make a point, I think, Mr. Calandrillo?
Yes,
A
crime
quick
rates.
point?
Yeah. Crime rates are super low in the morning darkness, 5 a.m., 6 a.m. If you look at crime data, it shows that that's the lowest crime rate of the day. So the criminals are not taking advantage of morning darkness.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Mallow, could you elaborate on how changing the clocks and loss of sleep or sleep misalignment could affect young children and juveniles when it comes to crime and their ability to make smart decisions?
Yes, I think that we're all affected by sleep. And some folks or some kids who are struggling may, when their emotional systems are not in sync and they're depressed, might turn to crime. I don't know. I'm not a crime expert, so I don't want to go down that path very far. I will say as a woman, though, that when I've slept, when I'm fully awake and I've gotten a good night's sleep, I think my wits are around me more. And I think that is an important point, that at least for personal crimes, when we're more awake and more alert, we're less apt to be the target of crimes because we have more situational awareness. But I'm not going to say anything more about crime. I'm going to leave that to my other witnesses because I think they're far more expert in that area than me.
And Mr. Calandrillo, would you care to comment?
Yeah, no, certainly I agree, sleep helps, but like I said, the crime studies have shown that the crime rates are much, much lower in morning darkness than they are in evening darkness. So it's important we take away that evening darkness. That's what daylight saving time does.
My grandparents and my dad, we owned, we didn't call it a convenience store, but we called it a mom and pop, a grocery store, many years ago. So I know, that it is a big concern when, and when I'm trying to think about, we were robbed a couple of times and it was, in the evening, but still concerned because we need our convenience stores and we need you to feel safe. So thank you so much, and I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back the balance of her time. Next, I'll recognize Congressman Soto for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Coming from the Sunshine State, we value sunshine for our quality of life, recreation, and our tourism economy. Over the years, I've heard countless complaints from constituents who hate going back to standard time in the winter months, losing hours of sunshine. In 2013, I drafted a bill called the Sunshine Protection Act during my first year in the Florida Senate. It would keep Florida on daylight savings time all year round, Chairman. I filed the bill on a Friday, no press release, little fanfare. By Saturday morning, the Orlando Sentinel called me and wrote a story. Well, the rest became history. It became a statewide story. It became a huge debate covered by just about every news station in Florida, and constituents and Floridians debated this for many years. Each of the 4 years I filed the bill while in the Florida Senate, it was the most popularly viewed bill in the state legislature. Sadly, serving in the minority there, the Republicans never gave me a hearing on my bill. And after I got to the Congress in 2017, they gave the bill to my dear friend and colleague, Senator Stubbe, at the time now member of Congress, a Republican, and it was promptly passed into law. So I suppose it's sweet justice that I'm here today, reviewing this issue again with the Democratic majority and our Republican colleagues. We found out a few revelations as I heard from various constituents about the bill. First, we were going to give schools flexibility in their start times, so no student would have to go to school in the dark. Our schools know how to run transportation, and we can give them the flexibility to do that. Second, we found our local farmers really didn't need the government to tell them what time to wake up in the morning. They would rise at dawn either way. Third, we found local tourism businesses and restaurants love the idea, from our major theme parks to our beaches and other local businesses in that area. Daylight in the afternoons led to more businesses getting more business from residents and tourists. Our constituents also loved it because they would no longer be in the dark for several months after they got out of a long day of work. It also encouraged more exercise and outdoor activities for Floridians, something that we care deeply about. As we complement ending the time change, don't send Florida and other states back to the dark ages, please. If we're going to set up one time, let's make it a daylight savings time permanently. So I think the legislation we're looking at least start the ball rolling would be really helpful. Mr. Calandrillo, you want to briefly go through the economics of how important this is for small businesses and mid-sized businesses, particularly in tourism and in restaurants and others?
Thank you so much, Representative Soto. I really appreciate your work on the Sunshine Protection Act. By the way, it's one of the last bipartisan issues in America, right? You had Senator Patty Murray from my state and Senator Rubio from your state helping you along with those bills, although they haven't gone anywhere, right? You want to think about the economic benefits of having that sunlight out in the afternoon and evening. That's when people shop, right? That's when people engage in outdoor activity. Again, putting that sunlight in the morning hour isn't going to have nearly the same effect. All the chambers of commerce that I've spoken to have supported the economic productivity created by daylight saving time. It's important we recognize that. And it's a net issue for me. I do cost benefit analysis. Obviously, we're trading it off against morning darkness, and I am sensitive to the sleep concerns. As you mentioned, that Florida allows for schools to start later, but we have to recognize the net benefit of pushing sunlight into the afternoon. There are costs to any proposal, and there are benefits to any proposal. We call AM prime time for a reason, not 5 or 6 a.m. That's when people want to get out in the evening, and they're much more willing to go out if there's sunlight. In fact, a lot of people don't even like to drive once sunset hits, right? They're nervous about the safety, and they're with good reason, because the traffic accidents go up dramatically, and it's way more fatal. So again, the economic impact, tourism industry, the restaurant industry, all of these industries prefer having sunlight in the part of the day when we can use it.
Thank you. And I'm also worried about our seniors and our kids, which is why the flexibility is going to be critical for school start times and for our seniors to have more consistent life rhythm to make sure we're avoiding strokes and heart attacks and some of these other conditions. Thank you, Chairman, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. With that, I'd like to thank our witnesses for their participation in today's hearing. I remind members that pursuant to committee rules, they have 10 business days to submit additional questions for the record to be answered by the witnesses who have appeared. I ask each witness to respond promptly to any questions that you may receive. At this time, I'll read, before we adjourn, the letters to be submitted for the record. A letter from the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, a letter from Save Standard Time, a letter from Updated Witness Testimony from Dr. Beth Mallow. And with that, this committee is now adjourned.
Great job, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.